Oh, what do you say about that? Good, bad? Let's have a chat.
The pressure, but it's picked up by Archer again. He tries to crash through the pack. He does. He got through Maxwell, and he has a flying shot at the goal. And that is a magnificent Glenn Archer goal. 2 in a minute to the man who the shit.
Welcome back to the Further North podcast, everybody. We've got Chief here to chat about our game last night at Marvel Stadium. A disappointing loss to the Bulldogs, but hey, at least we aren't Carlton. Chief, welcome along. Thank you for joining me again, mate.
Thanks, Josh. It was a long and sleepless night for me. Very hot, but also going over the game in my head a couple of times. And I'm not someone who can sleep after coming home from a night game, so it was just brutal. So I'm a bit tired. I've had 3 coffees already, so it actually rejuvenated me slightly. So I'm feeling pretty good.
Up and about, mate. I mean, look, maybe we should have had some coffee for our first quarter last night. That would have maybe made us a little bit more competitive. But hey, here we are. In the end, North Melbourne go down by 16 points to the Western Bulldogs, 113 to 97. Definitely a game that felt further away for me personally than we were. But before we get into the game, let's just start with team selection. Was there any crazy surprises or things that you questioned, or what did you make from our team selection? I feel like it was pretty standard to what most of us were thinking.
Yeah, pretty standard. I think the only question around it was whether he was going to get up with his corked calf, and in the end, he did, and he played really well. Thankfully for us, but Dill Stevens misses out. Tucker as the sub. I'm not completely sold with Tucker as the sub. I don't exactly know how much he gives us as a sub.
Yeah. Lacks a bit of impact in a short period of time.
Yeah, we know what Tucker gives us. Tucker is he's a meat and potatoes sort of player.
He's the Mr. Fix-It, as they called him on the website.
Yeah, for sure, and he can do jobs. He can tag. He's a good runner, but he's not someone who can impact the game. And maybe, I guess, when you're subbing someone out tactically, that's kind of what you want, is someone to come in and impact the game. And I think you and I are in agreement on this one, is that Eddie Ford is almost the perfect sub.
Absolutely.
Because he can play back, he can play forward, he can play in the midfield, he can play on the wing. So I like Eddie Ford as that sub. But that's probably the only one really for me. We'll get onto this later in the pod, but I thought some of the newer players that came in actually did quite a good job, to be honest.
No, I don't disagree with that. And I guess touching on your point for the Eddie Ford sub thing, imagine, we're down by 10 points or whatever it was going into the fourth last night, and you got Eddie Ford to come on and spark, Paul Curtis sparked into life and stuff. So, like I said, we'll go on to that a little bit more in a second, but I think you're right. The sub maybe wasn't the right sort of choice. What did you think of Constanti and RHJ both starting in the team?
Yeah, I, as I've said in previous pods, am a bigger fan of RHJ than I am Constanti. That said, being at the game and then watching the game as it unfolded, I thought Constanti really gave us quite a lot, much more than I thought he would, and I was actually really impressed. His numbers obviously don't jump off the page, but his pressure around the ball was really, really good, and I feel like he almost sets the tone down there for the amount of pressure in our forward line. And as a result, I think they were both wins on the night, I honestly think, in terms of compared to what we've had in previous years.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. Well, look, I was down to the game. I was up in level 3 today, hopefully back down in 29 next week. But something I was really interested in looking at when the game was about to kick off was who lined up on who. So obviously with the team selection, there was players scattered all over the place. Was Bailey Scott going to be off half back, and was Simpkin going to be on the wing? All of that didn't really eventuate, but just a couple of little points I've got here from the game were Charlie Comben straight to Darcy, when we would maybe perceive Core or potentially Logue coming back into the side as the one that should have gone. I think a lot of the fans had that opinion that maybe Comben could be cutting across and protecting the space in front of Darcy, but that didn't eventuate like that, and Chom did stand him all night, and we'll get to Charlie's performance. the Scott McKercher thing. McKercher starts on the wing with Scott on the other wing and Foss in the back line. So what did you make of sort of our lineup and the matchups there? Let's start with the Chom and the Darcy thing. Do you think that was... Maybe we'll skip over the performance and how it eventuated, but how did you feel before the game with Chom going straight to Darcy?
Yeah, I thought it's a mistake. I thought that we need to have a lockdown defender on one of their biggest offensive weapons. And I think the idea was that potentially Darcy would kind of lead Chom to the ball and it would just become a marking contest. But I think what maybe the coaching panel did, maybe Chom did, was completely underestimate how good Sam Darcy is.
No fan did, that's for sure.
Yeah, because if you look at how he marked, and not even his marking, like he's a third-year player now.
I think so.
If you look at just the way his forward craft was really, really good as well. So it's not like he's got obviously ridiculous athletic assets, but his forward craft was excellent. The way he worked Chom under the ball or pushed off him at the right times. I thought that would have been a better matchup for a Logue or a Core, where they would body him early and prevent him from jumping up, because obviously once he jumps up, it's almost impossible to get close to his arms. So that matchup, I thought, was a little bit of a loss. Well, definitely a loss, and we'll get onto the actual performance later on. But I thought they lined up pretty well, Josh. I mean, we lined up very similarly to what we thought it was going to be after the pre-season games. What did you make of the Foss down back?
I liked it. I think his performances definitely earned it, especially in that West Coast game. You know, that little bit more size about him, and I thought he was really, really good on the night. So I liked seeing him down there. Obviously, I was a big opponent, and lots of people were, for him or McKercher sort of playing off that half-back line. But, you know, he was involved, and I really liked his game. I think that's something to stick with through the season. We've seen the success of McKercher and Sheasel in the previous 2 years, starting off half-back, and how it can build a young player into a game, be around the ball, just get comfortable with the ball in hand, and then you can sort of maybe move them slightly up the field later on in their career. So, no, I was a massive fan of it. I liked the back line, the back six that started with the six that I wanted. The midfield was similar. There was a few things about the midfield as the game progressed, especially through early in the first half of the first quarter, potentially, that I was a bit questionable on. But structurally, I liked how the team lined up, and there wasn't really many surprises. So the game kicks off, and the Bulldogs come out absolutely stonking us, mate. How were you feeling through that first quarter, and what were some of the things that you think we did poorly to let the Dogs get away?
Well, it was classic Casa de Fueno from the Bulldogs. They just absolutely started shooting the lights out from the get-go. And I think the reality is that our pressure wasn't high. If you look at the numbers, that the pressure, and we'll talk about the pressure gauge maybe as we go along, it's very kind of a little bit fanciful, the pressure gauge. I think a lot of people don't really understand what goes into it, but our pressure was really low, particularly in the first half of the first quarter. And that allowed the Bulldogs just to run and do whatever they liked, really. Particularly the likes of Vandermeer, Ed Richards,
yeah. Bailey Dale.
Like Bailey Dale and Ed Richards particularly just had it on a string.
Yeah.
And I also don't, I was really disappointed, obviously, in the start. They came out and it seemed like structurally they had us from the get-go, and we were almost shell-shocked. But, the one improvement, Josh, is that what we didn't see is just these massive runs of goals that we've seen in previous years. Like, it wasn't, 8 to 10 goals in a row. It was 3, and then we'd be able to break that run for a little bit, and then with one or two of ours, and then it was back to 3 of theirs again. What did you make of we stuck in there, I guess, is my point, even when we were playing badly?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, one of the notes I've got down here is everything good we did, we undid by more. So we would give up a 3-goal run, and then we would come back and kick 2, and then give them another 2, and then kick 1, and they were just on top all night. We didn't lead for 1 second of this game, but the whole night we didn't get a lead, and we always kept pulling it back, but it was just never quite enough. I think you're right. The pressure was very soft in the first, and they came out and swung early and hit us, and I think we were a little bit stunned. The biggest question of this team, one of the many big questions in this team this year, is going to be how they can handle that sort of stuff. And like we saw with the Eagles preseason game, I think we maybe didn't stem the flow for them as well as I wanted to, but we always had an answer. I mean, one of the biggest things out of this game as a positive for me was, we nearly scored 100 points, which we were never really a look in last year for 100 points. We didn't feel like we did that very often at all. And I would say with slightly more accurate kicking, which we absolutely had chances to do, we score over 100 points in this game. So the downside of that is the transition was once again our biggest weakness. We with the pressure sort of from the second quarter onwards, I think was better, and I think the forwards' pressure was pretty good, which we'll come on to when we talk about the forwards. But it didn't matter how much we pressured. We always had a turnover in us. We always had a mistake, which led to quick transition, and they would get out the back, handball, always a free player, and then they would score off that more times than not. And I think I speak for so many fans when I say everything good we did, we undid pretty quickly to keep us behind. And even though we went on runs, it didn't really matter in the end. Do you sort of feel the same as that?
Yeah, I did. It reminds me very much so of the game on Friday night between Essendon and Hawthorn, where Hawthorn were just keeping Essendon at arm's length the whole time. Essendon would make a run, but then it was the ease with which Hawthorn would then kick multiple goals in a row after that, meant that Essendon just couldn't bridge that 3-goal gap, and it was a very similar game. We would make the running for a little bit of time. We'd do really, really well. We'd control the game, and then they just seemed to score so easily. Which was incredibly frustrating, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One of which, as you pointed out, is our transition defense. I've said it for the last 2 years, but I've definitely said it on this pod before. Our transition defense is so bad. So bad. It's the worst. It's the worst in the competition, and it's very frustrating that we get to this game and it's not any better. But I would say this is it's one game of a season against a team that's probably better than us, but we want to aspire to be as good as, if not better. So it's actually a good measuring stick, and we can't. It's so bare what our problems are that you can't help but go back to the drawing board and go, okay, we've got to double down on this stuff because it was so bad, particularly in the first quarter. Once the ball turned over, it was like they were off to the races, and they'd have 3 or 4 guys in front of the ball. And I think a little bit, Clarko talked about it in his press conference, a little bit of this was what he describes as an inside-outside mix. So we were like bees to a honeypot onto the ball. We would just get in on the ball, 2 or 3 players, and then their one player would be able to farm it out, and then they'd have 2 or 3 on the outside to then run it forward. And that was really obvious at the game. It happened so many times. The other thing that it was a bit frustrating was we didn't have the control the ball mode that we've shown against West Coast. There were times when we could have gone into that control ball mode, and we didn't. And we just weren't able to get really easy, uncontested marks, which they were. They were so good at just hitting up a lot of them weren't 15. I think we know that.
Yes.
This at the game, but they were able to skirt that rule a little bit, and they were just able to chip, and then just wait for that opening to come up with, and then they kicked through that zone a lot better than what we did.
Yeah, and I like what you pointed out there about, they were definitely a lot more patient and waited to go with the ball. And I think the one thing that was really frustrating me all night was it didn't matter how many players we had around the ball. They were better on the spread and always had this one handball, probably within 5 metres of the contest, say there was a stoppage on the wing, right? And there would be a ball up, they would always have a player on the corridor side of the pack that had absolutely nobody on him. And I don't know how that kept happening all game. They would handball it straight to the guy and then they'd be out. And I don't know what our midfield is doing and the supporting players around the midfield, but the amount of gaps leading into the corridor for like one handball out of the pack, they always knew the guy would be there. The other thing that always happens is they'll obviously continuously bomb the ball in. You know, it'll fall down and then there's 3 Bulldogs. And I've said this for 2 years now. We'll bomb the ball in long, create a contest, it'll fall backside of the pack, and there's no crummer for us there. We're all front and square, and it'll fall behind, and there's 3 Bulldogs ready to sweep it up, 1, 2, 3 handballs, and then they're out, and there's someone already leading to the wing. They've already premeditated how they're going to get out of there, and we just do not have that ability. We dwindle on the ball. We would get a mark. Paul Curtis was open on the forward flank so many times, and we just got a mark in the middle and just could have switched it over to him, and we'd wait, and we'd hesitate and wait for them to get back. And these are some of the problems that I just can't understand how an AFL quality team is doing. And that one I was talking about with that quick handball sort of corridor side of the pack of a stoppage around the ground, it happened all night, and I don't understand how someone gets free like that. Did you notice those sort of things as well?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this for a long time as well, is that it's potentially our midfield mix. We've got too many ball-playing mids, and they will want to go and get the ball. And that's what they do. We've got LDU, Extractor, we've got Simkin, Extractor, we've got Harry, who's probably a bit more inside-outside and reads the game a bit better than everybody, but he will naturally want to go and get the ball himself. Powell's the same. So we've basically, and I understand that it's still a learning thing for a few of those guys who are, you know, I mean, particularly for Harry, he's quite young. George, who's quite young. McKercher, it's going to take them time to get that inside-outside mix right. But the reality is that this is why when we look at the midfield and say we've got X, Y, Z player, which look excellent on paper. You know, you look at, we've got incredible midfield talent. But sometimes that mix doesn't necessarily work because we're all going for the ball and we're not worried about what's happening outside the stoppage. And that's what happened last night, as you said. Beats the honeypot. The reason why that guy's loose is because we've been drawn into the contest to try and 100%. Get the ball. And then we've left that guy free. And it was really it was a really disciplined midfield performance by them. Yeah. Like, if you look at the midfield as a whole, you could argue that we won the midfield battle. Certainly, numbers-wise, we probably did. And I have had a look on some of on the Bulldogs Reddit, and they seem to think that that they were beaten soundly, like they did. Yeah. Which to me, like, it's probably a matter of them being so used to winning the midfield by so much, and normally with Bond, Treloar and Richards, that they're not used to people getting parity. But we got to the point where, you know, it was pretty close, but there were critical moments in the last quarter, really, where we won the clearance battle for the entire game, except for the last quarter, and we ended up winning the clearances all round. But here's an interesting stat: we actually lost the scores from clearance by 14, which is like very similar to the end margin, and then we actually ended up losing the scores from clearance in the last quarter by 20. So that was the difference in the end.
For sure. No, I understand that. I mean, you know, that's a big caveat in this game is we're looking at, as for the midfield battle, and we'll get on to more mids in a sec, but looking at the numbers, right, and I'll get a few of the numbers up here that I just want to point out for the game. And even though the stats said we won the midfield, and this is why the eye test is absolutely a great barometer, I guess, of how a game went, because stats absolutely don't mean everything, because the midfield numbers, the numbers across the board, we dominated. We won disposals, kicks, handballs. Our disposal efficiency was better for the game. We got more free kicks, hit-outs, clearances, stoppage clearances, contested possessions, uncontested possessions. We won all this sort of stuff. Yet we didn't lead for a single second of the game. And just on the eye test, before I knew those stats, I thought our midfield got bullied. to be honest. And looking back, it's probably a slight overreaction, but we had no efficiency out of the middle, and we had no... And going back into comments I've made maybe about individuals, but I can put this on the whole midfield, which once again I'll dive into in a sec. No polish whatsoever. Doesn't matter if we win the clearance, if it's a hack out of the middle. Doesn't matter if we win it, if Jerry wins 8 clearances and he's bombing it to the wing on his left foot because he needs to get it out. A clearance is a clearance, I understand that, but it doesn't mean that it's positively contributing to our team. And I think that's maybe the problem. The stats show that the midfield played well, but on the eye test, mate, I reckon they were way better. They were a lot more clean, efficient, and like you pointed out, their clearances in midfield actually dominance, from what I thought it was, led to scores, where ours, even though we won the numbers, didn't really lead to much. It was bombing on people's heads again and all that sort of stuff. So, imagine if Bont and Treloar are there, mate, I honestly think we might lose this game by 6 goals. That's sort of the difference for me. And I think we competed well, but we have to set different standards. Competing well isn't good enough at some point. And if we keep saying we competed well, and using that as a pass mark, and I'm not saying that's what you're saying at all, but just as a general online consensus, the fans seem pretty split right now with the effort was there, so that's good. And it doesn't matter if there's effort if it leads to losing. And I'm sort of on that latter side of that, where I like seeing the effort because it hasn't been there for years. But if we are going to start winning games, effort isn't the be-all and end-all. And if they had their players in last night, mate, we lose that game by 6 goals. So, that's all being said, that's a much better result than our last game against them, and maybe what history shows. And I do think we competed well. I do think we looked better than last year. But at the end of the day, we've still lost the game, and I don't want to make that seem like that's okay or that's good enough, because I'm trying to personally set higher standards for the team, and effort and everything is great, and I love Constanti's pressure, and I think our pressure on the day, especially after quarter time, was very good. But I don't know, man, we were playing a very weak side, and imagine, Bailey Dale and Ed Richards doing that on top of Bont and Treloar just doing what they do every single week. So, I'm not stoked on the performance as a whole, but there were elements there that I liked, and it shows me we have improved, and I think there's things to build off. But as a whole, I still probably wanted more against what I thought was a gettable Dogs team. How are you sort of feeling to wrap up the game, just as a team, from a team perspective? How are you feeling about the game as a whole?
I'm a little bit more glass half full than you are. I feel as though I can understand where you're coming from, for sure. I respect everybody's opinion. I think your expectations of winning, which are completely fine, purely about how you're going to feel after the game. That's internally. Yeah. They've got different metrics, obviously. So sure. Obviously, one of which is winning. For me, obviously, I was frustrated by the game because I thought it was very winnable. But at the same time, all I can do is compare us to last year and what we shown last year, and also during the preseason, and it was an improvement. Now the real question is it a big enough improvement over an off season to be for us to be happy?
Yeah.
And that's probably a different question. I personally think, based on last night, I thought the finishing probably was the thing that prevented us from really being on top of that game. I mean, if you look at, the Bull Zerha is one of my favourite players, but he kicked quite badly, and I feel like on the balance of play, if we kicked the goals that we should have done via expected score, I would be interested to see the expected score, but I think we're right in it. I think it's more like a goal, and I think we're a little bit happier, So I think generally the way the team played, I could see what they were trying to do. That's a start, and I could see the green shoots. So I'm a bit more glass half full, to be perfectly honest. Still super disappointed though. Definitely, I don't like losing.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that supporters, and this is just something to think about for supporters, is one thing is to because I think supporters are looking to 2000, saying things like we've been bad since 2018, basically, which is very true. I completely understand that, and I completely understand that as a result we're a little bit of a tortured supporter base. But this regime, we're 2.5 years into this regime.
Yeah.
From a literal pipe bomb in the club, and we're getting rid of everybody. And I know people don't love people, talking about patience, because we look at Hawthorn and then you look at Richmond, what happened on Thursday night, and you think, well, why are we taking so long? And I think the answer is that obviously teams take different amounts of time, but also we want to create something that's super sustainable culturally. Yeah. And the hardest thing to change in any organisation is culture, and we've got to gradually work towards that winning culture, and it's just taking it's just taking time.
Yeah, no, look, I do agree with you there. I think, I've been one, and I've said this for years on this podcast, that we do have to be patient. And I think if we, as a collective, as a fan base, if we all agree, and most of the fans agree with this, that the rebuild started when Clarkson came in, that we're only 2 years into the rebuild, if you take out the section of time that he had off, especially with the Hawthorn stuff. So we can't say that the rebuild started with Clarkson and then still say we've been bad since 2018. Like, those are facts, but you can't have those contrasting attitudes towards you. You've got to pick a lane. You've either got to be, we've been bad since 2018 and I'm just waiting, or Clarkson came in, and since then we've seen improvement as a club as a whole, off the field especially, and we're building, and I agree with you, we're building something that's going to be sustainable, and I agree with that. There's not many teams in history, bar Hawthorn in the last 20 years, that have had a rebuild that's like super, super quick. So if I have to hear more people comparing us, look what Hawthorn did. Brisbane took years, Carlton took years, Melbourne took years, Richmond took years. This is every team. Every team normally takes 5 to 7 years, I would say, from a point where how low we were, how awful of a football club we've been since Brad Scott left. We're building from a very, very low base. Hawthorn have always had culture, structure. The back office has been there. The 2 coaches over 20-odd years. You know what I mean? So it's like there's different elements to take from it. So look, I'm not completely devastated. I wasn't doing well after the game. I was furious, but this is why you never podcast on the day of the game, and you sort of get your head together a little bit. So I do like things that I saw, and I do think that there's things to build off, but it's the skill errors as well. As much as you said not converting, and I guess that's a skill error in itself, but missed kicks, missed handballs, handballing it to people's feet. When are we going to not accept that anymore? Because I feel like it's been 4 or 5 years of poor skills, and I've always envied the Bulldogs and their handballing ability, especially in that premiership era, that early years of like 2016-17 of their regime. They could just handball behind their head, and there'd always be someone there, and we've never been able to do that. We can't kick it quick enough, we can't handball straight enough. When does that change? I don't know. What I think we do now is let's get into each line of the team. So let's start with some positives. Let's talk about the forward line. The forward line for me was a tick. I'm giving these guys a pass tonight. I think the forward line, bar some inaccurate kicking, as a structure, as a forward 6 to 8, whoever rotated through there, I really like what the forward line did. Jack Darling, I think, ticked the box. I loved his first goal and his celebration with the arms up in the air. I think he took a lot of pressure off Larky, obviously Larky kicking 5 in the end. So give me your sort of thoughts on the forward line as a whole, and let's, if you've got any notes or players you want to point out in the forward line, let's chat about them.
Yeah, I completely agree. Josh, just before we go on, that was a completely balanced take from you. I'm really surprised, and don't do it again.
No, that's not what people come here for, is it?
Yeah, we want the completely unhinged take. So, you need to go back to the drawing board.
Wait till you let me talk about Tom Powell later.
Okay, forward. I actually thought, to your point, functioned really, really, like, a lot better than what we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
I think we managed to keep the space a lot better than what we have in the past. There were some really good passages of play where we kept the space, and there was space out the back. Larky got out the back a couple of times. There are a few other players. So Jack Darling, whilst when he came in, I didn't think he would be the panacea to all of our problems. Mm-hmm. What he does do is he engages the second tall defender. And on a couple of occasions, that's really helped Larky out. There's a couple of occasions where Lob had to engage Jack Darling to prevent Jack Darling from floating across, and that gave Larky time to lead, or it gave him time to have a contest where the ball, if he didn't mark it, he'd bring it to ground, and there was a crumb. So I thought that worked really, really well. And the spacing will only get better as time goes on, as they get to work together. Also, we can argue, and I think a lot of people will, about the game of Bull Zerha. But one thing we did notice is he got a hell of a lot more of the ball this game, and he had, he kicked one for and one out of bounds. So he definitely was getting the ball near the goal. So that he was one beneficiary, obviously, as was Curtis. Like, he doesn't. There's just less focus on those guys, so they get off the chain a little bit. The other thing I wanted to talk about, Josh, and this is something that I haven't seen for many years, and something that I think you'll agree with, is that our pressure in the forward line was significantly better. We touched on it a little bit before with Constanti. RHJ, he had a little bit of the ball, but he was actually quite clean, particularly going inside 50, and that's what we need. He didn't hit the scoreboard, and that'll come as time goes on, but I thought he was great. I thought Constanti's pressure was great. I also think that the tackling inside and the pressure generally inside 50 was much improved. 10 tackles inside 50, that's better than what we averaged last year, so we've got to be happy with that. That said, though, statistically, we let them go from our forward 50 to scoring too often. Yep. Now, you can argue about whose fault that is, but that obviously partially sits on the forward line as well. What do you think about the pressure of the small forwards, mate? I thought it was really something that was exciting.
Yeah, look, there's a few points to touch on there, so let's go through them. The forward pressure, really liked it. Really happy with Zerha's pressure. He looked to be a little bit more focused on putting that pressure on, driving the guy into the ground and competing. Paul Curtis, I think, was always on top of people, especially around stoppage and things like that. Constanti, yeah, for sure. Something I want to ask you, because I'm not sure exactly how to put my finger on this, but he, to me, is a lot better than Zerha. Why? Oh, not Zerha, sorry. Kane Turner, my mistake. He does the Kane Turner role, but why is he better? Because he is better, and he looked to be a lot more aggressive when it came to tackling and a lot more involved. But I'm trying to think, Kane Turner did that, so why do I think Constanti's better than Kane Turner? I'm not trying to put them in the same bracket, but they're a similar type of game, because Constanti, apart from his one mark, which he passed off to Bailey Scott, which he could have had a shot, and I think, it's a fantastic decision to switch it back into the middle and get a better shot by him. So, and maybe that's the difference, right? Is a little bit more game awareness on the offensive end by him seemed to be better. But I loved Constanti, but I'm struggling to be like, Constanti's better, but what did he do that was better?
First off, Josh, do not besmirch the legendary name of Kane Turner.
Don't start this, mate. Come on.
Please
Baldwin superstar.
Put your manners back in. That's the first thing I need you. No, quite seriously, I think first off, he's more talented.
This is
I'm not
That's
having a go at Kane Turner, but he's a more talented player. Watching him at the game, his attack on the player is just it's manic. He just runs as fast as he can to try and close that player down.
Puts his head over everything as well. He was really,
puts his head in the trough. There was one particular incident where I'm like, why'd you do that? But it's pretty crazy. There was a massive pack and he tried to attack the crumb, and he's literally just put his head straight down like a battering ram and run straight through the pack and like knocked a few guys over. It's kind of what we've been missing. And I've been a person who's like a little bit, how would I put it? I'm a little bit skeptical of players that just are not a good ball in hand at all, because I think sometimes you just need some base level of skill, and he probably does have that. I'm just being harsh on him, but he definitely changed my mind last night. He made a difference. He made a valuable contribution to the team.
Yep, no, I completely agree. Him and RHJ were definitely a query for me. I didn't have Constanti in my 22 that I would have selected personally, but he's changed my mind for sure. Really good first performance by him. I still want him to be able to threaten the scoreboard. I think if him and RHJ don't end up threatening the scoreboard in the next month of football, I think their spots could be in doubt, or I think should be in doubt regardless. Maybe not RHJ as much, but like Constanti definitely. If he doesn't start affecting the scoreboard too much, his spot should be in doubt, because my belief is always any AFL footballer should be able to tackle, right? So that's where maybe my opinion lies there. But I loved the effort, and he did bring a different intensity. Like you said, a bit of a tone setter down there of intensity, which I think lifted Zerha and Curtis. Curtis did one where he chased down the guy and tripped him in the end, I think, right in front of goal. But you'd much rather that effort and the trip to slow the play up than you would, just no effort at all and conceding the trip, you know what I mean? So, look, I really like it. Let's get on to Cam Zerha, because this has been a really interesting talking point. And spoiler alert, I asked for some fan questions, which we might not do in this pod just for the runtime, but we're going to do a separate Q&A episode, which we'll release on YouTube. So everyone who's not on YouTube, please get over there, subscribe, and we're going to get all the fan questions read out over there, and we're going to do a separate Q&A episode throughout this week and the next few days. So the response on Zerha when I asked the questions, what are your thoughts on the game, was a lot of people saying Zerha was good, and a lot of people saying Zerha should be dropped to the twos. Now, I'll just give my sort of thoughts on this, and then I'm really interested to see how you thought about him. I really liked Zerha's game, and I was thinking about putting him in one of our better players. The kicking wasn't good enough. 1 goal, 3, I think you said, in and out of bounds.
I think it was 1-4 and out of bounds, yeah.
So, I can live with inaccurate kicking as long as it doesn't become a trend. But the difference for me with Zerha was the amount of leading into the pockets and getting the ball. His attack on the footy was there, and he looked engaged. He was pushing up the ground more. He wasn't ending with 8 to 10 touches, and he got 14, 15 odd touches, which for a guy who played forward basically all game is good. I really liked what he brought. I have no issue with Zerha apart from the inaccurate kicking. I think he's one of the better kicks in the team. He hit the post on one of them as well. We gave Darling a pass sort of last week for the exact same thing. So I think Zerha, I don't think is any different this week, except his work rate was there. He's finding pockets of space in the 50 and people hitting him up. I reckon he probably took the most marks on the lead in the 50 out of anyone in the entire game. He probably had more than the whole team combined. So, I liked Zerha's game, and I think he was one of the better ones on the day. But how do you feel about some people and their other, if you're going to play devil's advocate here for a little bit, maybe just for contrast's sake, why do you think some people's opinion, and we had 3 or 4 people comment this saying, time for the twos Zerha, or not good enough. Why do you think maybe some people have that opinion on him?
Well, he had a few skill errors as well as the missed shots on goal.
So did the whole team.
He turned it over a couple of times. I agree. I personally think it's a bit of a mouth. Look, this is going to be harsh. I'm sorry to those people out there. It's a bit of a mouth breather take to say that he should be playing twos.
I agree.
Because there's 2 elements to that. It's number 1, that you don't think he's good enough for AFL level, and number 2, that there is someone in the twos that is better than him. So both, and there's a fail on both of those questions, right?
Yeah.
Because he's clearly an AFL level player, and I know that there are a lot of people out there who are frustrated because we've yet to see the absolute best of him. We get 1 or 2 King of Marvel games a year, or even every 5 years. But I can't. I'm more, as I said, I'm glass half full. I'm definitely more sort of I'm happy that he's playing well, and this is kind of what we thought would happen with JD in the team, is that he would then get off the leash a little bit.
For sure.
And it's going to take time for them to work that out, because you're going to have, they're going to run into each other's space, and these are things that they'll work out over time. But I thought he was really, really good. I mean, he except for the skill errors, basically. He, as you say, he's super engaged. High half forward is one of the hardest positions in the game to play. And it can be starvation corner at times, but at the same time, I guess the frustration for us is that he didn't make it count when he had the opportunity. But I do believe it'll come. I think hopefully we can get maybe, based on what I saw last night, we'll get a few more King of Marvel games.
Yeah, I think that's the best overall Zerha game I've seen in the last definitely the last year, barring that performance against the D's last year. If he kicks more accurately, he kicks 3 goals, 2, or even 2 goals, 3. I think we're talking a little bit differently about him. Or say 3-3 if he doesn't kick it out of bounds on the full. I think if he can do that all year, if that's his level, he's going to be a very good player this year. Let's go on to Paul Curtis then, really quickly, the last player we might chat about before we go into the midfield. What do you think about his game? I think in the first 3 quarters, a lot of pressure, but maybe a little bit lack of impact. He kicked a couple inside 50 pretty nicely to set up a couple of set shots, but came alive in the last quarter. Do you think he's going to be more of has a 3-goal quarter sort of player this year, where Zerha maybe had a more overall performance? Or do you see him with 3 goals and Zerha finishing with 1? Do you see him being the next guy next to Larky this year?
Oh, it's such a good question. I think it's a good problem to have. Like, they're both 2 offensive weapons. I think I'm much more pleased with Curtis's game, because what you've seen with Curtis is he's put on immense pressure for the whole game. And now that he's got the tank to be able to run out games, this is going to be his lot. He's going to outrun teams and outrun opponents. And that's what he did last night. He put on so much pressure, and yes, he didn't have as much impact ball in hand, but because of his improved conditioning and his confidence in his own game, he knows that if he just keeps doing the right thing again and again and again and again, that he'll get his lick of the ice cream. And that's what happened. It's just work rate that got him to those positions that we saw last night, particularly the one where he smothered the ball and then kicked it off the ground. Yeah. That's work rate. So I'm so happy with Curtis, because he, as we know, he can be a really enigmatic offensive player. He can do spectacular things, that goal against Sydney a couple of years ago, for example. But what we wanted to see from him is a smoothing out of effort across the game and making sure he's 100% effort across the game. And that's what we got last night, because his tank's there and he'll just get his lick of the ice cream at the end of the game. So I was just really, really happy for Curtis. And I do think it'll be our hot takes, Josh, if we take you back to our hot takes pod, 70 goals between the 2 of them. They've got 4 out of 1, so they're on track. Yeah. I mean, so 4 out of 1, they're on track. You're totally right. Yeah, let's hope, mate. Let's hope. Zerha could have had a monster night as well, and I think that's the thing we're trying to say. One more point I might make super quickly on the forward pressure before we go to the mids is when we're setting up off the kick out, say we kick a point and the opposition's kicking out, we always give up. And we were like this in the Eagles game. We're always willing to give up that kick to the pocket, but it's what happens next is our issue, and I think that's the midfielders. And I'm going to have some things to say about them, but our midfield pressure, I think, is really the biggest problem out of the entire team, because giving up that little kick to the pocket, I think, is a bit of a nothing kick, and I don't think the forward line's more setting up in a zone. But the midfielders, it's the next kick, and the Dogs always seem to get that wing half forward kick, that next kick to open up the play and get them out of our forward 50 was always on, and that's on the midfielders to follow the guys who are leading into those little pockets, because it just opened up the game. So I don't want to put the forwards. You were saying before that the forward pressure was great, but we still allowed it to run out quickly. I don't really believe it's on the forwards as much as it is on the midfielders for not trying to chop off that second kick, that kick outside the 50 better. I think that's where the game always opened up, because if we give up a kick into the forward pocket, it is what it is, but it's defending that next kick. Anyway, the midfielders. Give me your thoughts on the midfield group as a whole, because I've got a couple of things to say about the midfielders that some people like, some people won't. Back to the hot takes. No more neutral takes from me. But tell me your thoughts first, man. Yeah, this is probably going to be the hardest of all. I think, because it's definitely not black and white with this midfield. I mean, I think we all acknowledge that the talent is there, and probably out of the three areas of the ground, the midfield is probably our strongest. But as we said before,
on paper.
On paper, I think we fail to get the mix right. Of inside versus outside, we get drawn to the ball too much, and against a really well-coached, well-drilled team in the Bulldogs, we were found wanting for large portions of the game. I think I tend to agree with you that at times we lack polish. I do think, though, that's less about that. It's more about a general culture and idea through the team that's been born out of years of not having success. And there's this, panic's the wrong word, but they tend to get the ball on the boot a lot quicker than what they would what other teams do, because there's like a perceived pressure, and we saw that in the back line for portions last night as well. So I think over time, hopefully that changes, and we need to get that mix right, that inside-outside mix. I think the numbers were, as we said before, the numbers were passable, if not maybe a slight win. But when we lose a clearance or when we turn the ball over is when we're in strife, because our midfield just and whether it's hard to put your finger on why it is, but why our midfield keeps getting beaten back and doesn't transition defensively well that's a Clarko question. It's obviously not an us question, but they clearly don't do it. It's all duck. No, it's all duck, no dinner. Sometimes, we either win the clearance and then we're deep in our forward line, or we lose the clearance and then it's a goal to the other, or a score to the opposition.
Now I agree with that. I think my opinion on the midfield is I've never. I struggle to think of another midfield that I think is so talented, yet lacks so much almost effort. Do you know who started? I do not know this, by the way. I was meant to look and I missed I was sitting in the ground, but they bounced the ball and I didn't see. Who was our first three starting in the middle?
I thought it was Simpkin, LDU and Sheasel.
It was LDU. Why was LDU playing out of the goal square or in the forward line so much in that first quarter? Because I swear he had one centre bounce in that midfield at the start of the game then, and then just went straight forward, and the next few bounces were like Powell, Phillips and Sheasel or something like that. And LDU was practically invisible for me until the last quarter. The numbers aren't shocking, but and maybe to what I was trying to say before, I've never seen a midfield so talented but lacks so much impact on a game. So, and I'm not, it's becoming a joke about me and Tom Powell and all that sort of stuff, but I'm going to blanket a lot of players with this. You look at even Sheasel, to me, just one of the lowest impact games I've seen from him, and he was our best midfielder on the day, I'm pretty sure, but by half time, I was like, are LDU and Sheasel even there? And they're links in the chain and they're getting the ball, but I didn't see LDU burst out of a stoppage until basically the last quarter when he kicked one inside 50, and I believe Curtis marked. I think it was one of Curtis's marks in front of goal in the last quarter. So, Sheasel was missing kicks. He turned the ball over, kicking out of the back 50, missed the target, and they got a goal directly from it. Tom Powell will get the ball, and I know people this caused a bit of controversy, but lacks so much polish and just not good enough disposal. Simpkin is the same. I liked Simpkin's effort. I liked his willingness to. I think he won the ball cleaner than a lot of those guys, but just he doesn't know where his feet are, mate. He kicked the ball, and especially in the first half, we were kicking the ball to run along the ground, or we're kicking it straight to the opposition, or putting it on the boot when we had more time. I'm so flat from this midfield performance. I could not believe the numbers were in our favour towards the end of the game, because like I've said before, and I'll tie this up here in a sec, is if they had Bont and Treloar through that midfield, we get smashed out of the middle. We just didn't execute. I was shocked that our numbers were better than theirs, and I hope they're not going back saying, look at the numbers, we were on top. the lack of impact that Sheasel, Powell, LDU, and especially Luke Parker, mate. I thought Luke Parker was very average on the night. The numbers maybe don't seem as bad as they were, but there was... how many moments did we get back into 10 points? And there was nothing from him in the middle. I didn't see him doing much around the ground. I didn't think his disposal was great either. He's probably maybe my biggest letdown from the game, of the player that's meant to be the best out of the 3 recruits. So, look, I'll put a bow on this, but really, really flat on the lack of impact our entire midfield had. I don't think anyone really stood out for me. Sheezer's numbers by the end were okay, but I still don't think he had the impact he usually does on games. Pretty flat on Powell and LDU. LDU was last year, sort of had to build into a season though, so we'll see. But lastly, Parker, I'm not loving the lack of impact in the clutch moments in the last quarter and that sort of stuff that he sort of brought. But you can counteract me on that, because we had a couple of people say they loved Luke Parker's leadership. I completely disagree. But as we know, not everything I see or say is correct, and I'm always open to being proven wrong there. I've ranted long enough. Go.
Yeah, so that's your Instagram reel, Josh, right there with the caption. So
absolutely,
that was a nice one. I would look. I think so. Let's just unpack that just a little bit. I think our best midfielder on the night was probably Simpkin, in my opinion. I don't think his disposal was fantastic, but I think his pressure around the ball, and I think his tackling, I think his attack on the ball was really, really good.
Can I just say really quickly? Sorry, I agree with you as well. I came out of the game from the eye test saying Simpkin, I think, is our best midfielder, and then the numbers went in favour more of especially Powell and Sheasel, and then I'm like, was my opinion wrong here? I'm trying to be as objective as possible. And on the eye test, Simpkin's rubbish kicks stood out, but when he wasn't butchering the ball 2 or 3 times, I agree with you there.
Yeah, and I think so for all those people who get frustrated at our captains for quote unquote not setting the tone, I think Simpkin did that. I think he set the tone as much as he could. He tackled really hard. His effort was very, very high. He put his head in the trough multiple times. So I thought he was our best midfielder. When it comes to Parker, to that Parker issue, I tend to agree that his with ball impact was minimal, I would say. Like, he had 20 touches or whatever it is, but in modern football, like that's not the hardest thing to get for an AFL level player. I would say that one thing that we don't know is how much of an effect he had in those times when we were looking really, really bad. And what I mean by that is, in those times when we have a run of 3 goals against us and it looks like we're going to get done by 70 in the first quarter, what is he doing? Yeah. What is he talking about? What
vocally, you don't know how
displaying?
He's setting up the team, telling players where to go. And I just want to caveat my little rant really quickly with, that's not my opinion on all the players for the rest of the year. Like, this is just an isolated thing in the game, and that's how I feel about this one game. Before people start telling me I hate Powell and I hate Parker now, and if Parker kicks the winner next week and I say Parker was great, don't come at me and be like, oh, you hated Parker. Yeah, I did hate Parker last week, but it's week-to-week stuff. Everyone feels that way. So just a caveat, it's not my set opinion this year on all these players. It's just an isolated game.
Yeah, and as footy fans, we have memories like goldfish. So what happens is that the next week they're the best player in the world and they're always my favourite player, and I've got their poster on the wall. Yeah. But I think that the Powell, Sheasel, LDU thing, I don't remember really about LDU too much in the middle versus forward, but I think probably it was one of those things where they were protecting his numbers and like keeping his powder dry for the second half, knowing that it was going to be hard to run out that game with the heat. But look, it's a really good debate to have is it's like the effect of the disposals that we have in the midfield, because based on last year and some of the football that we played, we would just put up huge numbers and the effect of those numbers would be minimal. But if that's the game style that we're playing, which is this ball control style game style, that's fine. Like, you can put up huge numbers and it's because we're bossing the ball. Mm-hmm. We talked about it before, like Barcelona's 4-3-3, or like Argentina in World Cups of times gone by is just controlling the ball and like almost lulling the other team into to sleep or making them defend for long periods of time. that wasn't last night. I actually had a look at a couple of quarters when I got home because I couldn't sleep, and Sheasel does quite a lot of stuff that's just classy and you don't really see, particularly with his hands. So I'm willing to give him a pass for his 31 and probably minimal impact. Powell is an interesting one. At the game, I thought his first half was actually really, really good, particularly in the first quarter. Like his work around the ball in the first quarter when we were getting tranced was probably the best of our midfield. He went away in the third and then came back in the fourth, but and his numbers were fairly decent. So yeah, I understand why you were frustrated with his game, Josh, but at the same time, I think when the going was tough, he actually was actually fairly decent. Yeah. I'm going to put another player to you, and the fans out there who listen to the pod will remember our debate of McKercher versus Powell.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, look, I was going to come to McKercher.
Yeah, I'll set you up for this because McKercher, I think, has the highest ceiling maybe of our entire team, and he had a really bad game. Yeah. He made multiple mistakes. One, like 2 or 3 absolutely critical errors, which cost us goals. Yep. And I don't know. I'm not seeing the last night. I didn't see the composure, ball in hand that I would like him to have, given that he should be one of our best players, ball in hand.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And with the Tom Powell and LDU thing with the midfield, I'm not saying they had a bad game, because the numbers wise they got around the ball. I'm looking at the centre bounce attendances quickly here. LDU had 24 and he had the most by 5. Parker had the second most for us, barring Jerry Ruckman. Parker had 19 centre bounce attendances, and I was shocked by that. I would have sworn that Powell, Sheasel, Phillips felt like the midfield that was there the most. So I'm really surprised to read those numbers, especially Parker having 19, the second most on our team. I think is really interesting because it didn't feel like there was much happening from them through the midfield. Now, did Tom Powell have a bad game? I'm not saying he had a bad game, but like I've said before, and now this is our whole midfield. This is not a Tom Powell thing. This is our whole midfield. Lacked impact and lacked polish, and we didn't execute. Yes, we won the ball, won the clearances, but did we do anything from those clearances? It felt like no. So I don't think they had awful games, but I think they lacked a lot of impact and effect on the game. Now, McKercher, that you've set me up for the alley-oop for. Completely agree. McKercher, some crazy mistakes, and even things that I don't think I saw him do last year. I think he's almost like his first year went in fearless. Yeah, he had some poor moments, to be honest, and I'll try and find, I don't know how many possessions he had in the end. I'll try and look that up quickly, but he... looked a little bit nervy. Fino Sullivan, which I guess we'll talk more about when we go to the back line because he was more down there, looked the more composed and looked the better on the ball for sure. But we know Colby's quality, and I do back him that it's a bad game and it's not going to be a consistent thing, where I think some of these other guys we're talking about, I don't know where the ceiling is, and I don't know how much better they can be, because I think maybe we're hoping some of the midfielders are better than they maybe are. Compared to Colby, where I think we know what his potential is going to be, it was more just an off game from him. But that isn't an excuse for the turnovers costing a couple of goals, and definitely someone that I wanted off half-back and still do want off half-back that should be executing a lot better when we struggled immensely to get the ball out of the back 50, and especially from kick out. Caleb Daniel could only do so much, but we maybe saw that it's still going to be really, really tough, even with Caleb Daniel there, to get it out of our back 50. But as for McKercher, hopefully it's down to a bad game, because we know he can be A grade, and I hope he comes back better the next game.
100%, yeah, agreed.
Yeah, for sure. Any other midfield points you want to touch on here? Bailey Scott, I guess we haven't touched on. I think it was a very 7 out of 10 Bailey Scott game. Didn't do anything immensely bad. Was good, ran all day, kicked a goal, got open, linked in the chain. I didn't mind Bailey Scott's game. The last point we'll say, Wilfield. Why do you think Wilfield got subbed off?
Yeah, I thought he was a little bit stiff to get subbed off, to be perfectly honest. I think he just did his job, like what he should do. And if he was there for the whole game, he probably would have got 20-odd touches maybe, or 15 to 20-odd touches, and maybe people feel like that's not enough. I think that's
he got 11
frustration.
touches.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a frustration because, as I said, our inside-outside mix wasn't working, and I feel like of all the midfielders, he's probably the most defensive-minded, so having him sweeping was probably something that... But obviously the coaches know better than me, so I understand. Like, especially subbing him out for Tucker kind of is a weird one. And maybe that meant that they wanted to have like Parker and Simpkin in there a little bit more than what they were doing previously. Because that's kind of what the mix is. They bring that half forward up, and that half forward plays like a little bit more midfield. So maybe that was why.
Yeah, I mean, well, Sheasel ended up with 17 centre bounce attendances. Simpkin only got 10. Wilfill 11. So, interesting numbers there. So it's very, very interesting to see the balance is maybe different than what I felt like it was in the game. Let's go to our back line, and we'll see if we can do this in about 15, so the pod's not too long. Give me your overall thoughts on the back line as a whole. I'm probably a little bit flatter on the midfield, and I think the back line, I'm flatter on the midfield this game because I expected better from the midfield, being our most talented line of the field. But the back line is pretty worrying for the year personally. Give me your thoughts. Give me your rundown on the back line as a whole.
I think we didn't get the matchups right. Like, clearly we needed to make this change Comben onto Darcy. I think part of that was probably they were obviously worried about Norton getting off the chain, but also Darcy did spend like quite a long time in the ruck, so maybe it was part of that. That was a little bit of the thinking there. I thought the Smalls did okay. Like, it wasn't a terrible game. It wasn't a brilliant game. Look, by the way, I'll caveat this. I was at the game, so I'm like literally watching. It's a little bit of a different experience when you're watching on TV.
100%.
I feel like. I thought Archer did a decent job. We didn't really see him too much. And maybe that's a good thing because it means that he's not making a whole bunch of mistakes.
That's true.
As I said, I don't think he's a ball-in-hand player anyway, so not seeing him is probably a good thing. It means that he's locking down on somebody. So I thought the absolute issue for me is obviously Chom and what his form is like, because he had he definitely had his worst game at AFL level, barring the one where he broke his leg. So it was a really tough night for him. He was outmatched. He got his positioning wrong time and time again. It seemed like he was very, very low on confidence. I think I had a look at him on the Dream Team at halftime, and he was negative in the Dream Team.
Yeah, wow.
Which is not good.
No,
like that's not a good sign. So it was a bad night for him. I don't want to assassinate one player because everybody has their off nights, but I was pretty disappointed in his game. Yeah,
I guess the only reason we could maybe justify Chom going to Darcy is the size. You really see Darcy's an absolute unit, but Logue and Core would have been incredibly undersized on him. So if they could have because Logue was playing on a much smaller opponent, right? So I'm not a coach. I'm not Alistair Clarkson. I'm not saying this would have won us the game, but in my opinion, Core and Logue go on Norton and Darcy, and wherever Darcy is, you make Chom run off his player or get an extra flooding back to cover Chom's run to intercept in front of Darcy. To caveat Chom's performance, because numbers-wise not good, Darcy did only kick one goal. And we were going into that game thinking he could kick 6 to 8 goals. I definitely was. I said, barring a Darcy clinic, I think we should be the better team, which obviously didn't eventuate, but Chom played on him, and Darcy led up the ground and got a lot of marks outside the 50, but he didn't threaten the goal very much for me. And Chom's performance didn't look good one-on-one, but Darcy didn't really get any ball around goal to threaten. He hit the post and he kicked one as a snap, which wasn't from a mark. So I'm not saying Chom's game was better than what the numbers show, because on the eye test I was like, he's not having a great game, and a couple of disposals. Well, McKercher dropped a mark. That was the main one, wasn't it? It was a silly switch by Chom to kick it back into the back pocket. Just kick it long down the line at that point. I know we get tired of that sometimes, but a switch to the back pocket isn't going to be, when you're basically on the 50-metre line, isn't good enough. But and obviously McKercher dropped the mark and the turnover, not good. McKercher took his eyes off the ball. I saw him. I was sitting in that pocket right in front of him, and he went to mark, turned his head to go before he even marked the ball. That was the problem. But do you think there's any validity to this argument here that Darcy didn't really threaten at goal very much? His one goal was from a snap from open play, and barring the shot that hit the post, he didn't really have many shots. How do you feel about that?
I think his goal was from one of the first goals in the game.
Oh,
and
sorry, it was
and he
two.
marked. Yeah, he marked against Chom.
It was, sorry, my mistake.
Look, in all honesty, I think that is blue sky thinking. That's how I describe it, because I think every time Chom went near the ball, he made a mistake. Just about. I'm not every time, but
and I'm not justifying it. I'm just trying to play a bit of devil's advocate here, because we all would have thought that Darcy was going to kick 4 minimum, and he didn't. So I just want to give a little bit of perspective on that. I do agree with you here that Chom made a lot of mistakes, but there's plenty of times last year where we said Aiden Cole wasn't good, but his opponent only kicked 1 or 2 when we thought it was going to be more. So
yeah, my thing with I think that's purely about the structure. I don't think that is to do with Chom's performance, because I think Darcy, again, eye test at the game, Darcy outmarked him, I would say 5+ times. Do you think
it's a structural thing more than Chom maybe pushing him? I know Chom's not pushing him up the ground, but I don't know, mate. I agree with it all, but at the end of the day, he kicked 1-1, and you're always going to concede 1 mark in front of goal to the best of it. Sam Taylor will do that as well. And once again, I think Chom made mistakes. 1-on-1, he got bullied, but I don't know. With a performance like that from Chom, I would have thought Darcy would kick more. So I'm just trying to be a little bit of devil's advocate here.
No, Darcy was playing centre forward, so he's always going to take the ball, around that half forward line, and he set up. I understand he only kicked one goal or whatever it is, but he set up multiple goals. Yeah, he set up 3 or 4 goals. So he had a lot of score involvements. As I said, he outmarked him 5 or 6 times. And then there were 2 or 3 errors for Chom. The one that sticks in my mind is him leaving his player, which was great to try and get that ground ball, mishandling the ground ball, and then they just go straight down behind him and kick.
You've at least got to keep the ball in front of you as well. Yeah, that happened a lot for the whole team all night. Was we would leave an opponent, or we would have the ball be rolling towards us. We would have the run on it, and we would overrun the ball. And I know they're trying to pick it up cleanly, but it's almost like cricket, where you've got to put your knee down on the ground and then pick the ball up in front of it so it doesn't run under you for a boundary. And it's the same sort of thing. You've got to find a way to, at minimum, if you do not pick the ball up, at least hack it forward, kick it forward, or have your body in the way so it doesn't spill behind you, and then you're just completely out of the play.
When it came to the switch, I actually thought the switch was exactly what we needed. I actually think it was on, and we needed to get the ball to the other side of the ground.
We just don't move it fast enough, though. And I think at that point of the game, I was like, that we switched so slow that the amount of times we would switch it and 2 kicks to get it to the other side of the 50, and the Bulldogs had already covered off, and the lack of intensity to lead as well from all of our, especially the midfield, mate. And this is why I'm so flat on the midfield. The lack of intent to lead into the space, the amount of dump kicks we had to go to. I agree, the switch is a good thing to try, and maybe it was on, but do I have faith that the midfield will continue the switch to be on? Absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, like, the only thing that made that switch wrong was the fact that McKercher dropped an uncontested mark, which 99 times out of 100 an amateur level player would take. And I'm not calling him an amateur, it's just a mistake, like these things happen, but I think we need to switch the ball more to manipulate the defense a little bit more. And that's probably where it was a bit frustrating at times, like the ball control thing. I just wasn't I wasn't full, we didn't see all of it. But anyway, back to the backs. I think the other two talls were decent enough. I think Norton got his lick of the ice cream a little bit when it came to, he got a few scores and a few on the lead and took a few good marks. The other thing is, I know everybody hates on Luke McDonald. I'm not one of those people, but if you're at the game and you see, I thought Luke McDonald he made a couple of mistakes, but nothing out of the ordinary. I thought his bravery to go back with the flight actually saved us probably 2 or 3 shots on goal. Where he went back, he knew Norton was coming out. And out of everybody in this league, I think Norton is the last person I want coming the opposite way, because he just does not care. He doesn't care about his own body. He doesn't care about everybody else's body. And he just smoked McDonald at least 3 times. And McDonald, brave as they come, made the contest, prevented Norton from marking it, and I thought that was really, really good leadership.
Yeah, no, look, I don't disagree with that. I think it's the disposal with McDonald and the decision making, isn't it? Like, I agree with you, and even the biggest McDonald hater will admit that he puts his body on the line and will always put his head over the footy. And there was a few times that he did do that. There was a goal line one where he threw himself on the ball or put his body on the line to win the ball and probably stopped the ball spilling out and them kicking a goal. It's hard. I'm slowly turning with Luke McDonald a little bit by thinking I do see why so many people, and I've always seen it, but I get more and more why people maybe think we need to move on from him, and I don't disagree with that opinion, but I do think the discourse around him can be much too harsh. I fully agree with you that he's more than happy to sit in the pocket or dive into the pocket and get hit, which not a lot of players would do. It's when you watch our team try and dispose of the ball outside of the back 50, out of the back 50, and he gets the football, I guess that's the thing that gets concerned. There were so many times where we would get the ball and hesitate to dump kick and then handball it back to someone who's under pressure and then just couldn't get it out of that back pocket, and he is a part of that as well. So there's 2 very contrasting opinions for me with Luke McDonald. Is fully agree with what you're saying, where he puts his body on the line. I think he saved us a few times, and that's unquestionable by him. But then it's the other side of what he needs to be able to do that I think is very poor as well. So, would go to put his body on the line as much? I don't think so. But would he supposed to be better? I think so. Hardiman, I guess, is the Luke McDonald, but meant to be, has a higher potential, or could be that type of player, but levels above. But once again, doesn't seem to be getting a look in, and I would probably play Goda over him anyway. So, look, it's really interesting. Can Foss be that player? I don't know if I see him that way, but it's a position that if we want to get better as a team, we have to fill and replace, just like Darcy Tucker and a few guys like that. But at the moment, I don't think he's quite as bad as people think, but I don't think he was good. I don't think he was bad. I think he was sort of there, competed well, saved us a few times, but did some other things to put us under pressure.
I think Hardiman might even get a look in this week, mate, because based on what happened with Jackson Archer
that was the next point,
late in the game.
Do you think he's getting rubbed out? I haven't seen it back, by the way. In the stadium, I saw it, and I didn't. It was so quick that I didn't know who got the ball first. It obviously looks like both players diving in for the ball, and the Bulldogs player putting his head over it more, where Jackson sort of just went to ground. In this day and age, I'm pretty convinced he's getting weeks, but I don't know if it's potentially justified, because I think it was incidental. It was just an incidental contest, but I would be shocked if he didn't get weeks, mate. The guy was on the ground, got out. So
it's one of those things where you can contest. So basically, you've got, on one hand, you've got a player getting injured, which is terrible, and a head-high contact. But the thing is that, and this seemingly doesn't make it better, but it does slightly, is that Cleary's head came in contact with Jacko's knee because Cleary was diving forward. Now, there is the rule that you can't dive to the ground to get a ground ball because you'll take out someone's legs, which is the Lindsay Thomas rule. With Gary Rowan. So, Jacko, you've got to ask the question, what's Jacko got to do there? Is the answer to pull out? So basically what happened is that Jacko stayed relatively upright. So he didn't slide in. He didn't try and hip and shoulder him. He just stayed relatively upright and then had his legs taken out from underneath him because he was going so hard at the contest. So I think this is one of those ones that you can kind of put down as a football incident, and maybe the AFL looks to outlaw it down the track. But I mean, it looked really bad for Jacko's knee. I think he would have gotten a pretty bad tweak to the MCL from that one. But I heard Clarko say that he should be okay. So, but Hardiman's probably the one that comes in for Jacko if Jacko goes out.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I agree with you 100%, by the way. I just have no faith in the match review panel to look at someone who got knocked out and not suspend. I think the last 2 years of AFL football with match suspensions has been pathetic, and I just don't have any faith in them, to be honest, mate. I think they'll see the player got hit high, he got knocked out, and that's weak. So I agree with you 100%, though. It didn't look like Jackson slid in and hit him with the knee into his head or anything like that. He didn't look malicious or didn't look clumsy, but I just have no faith in this panel. Look,
hopefully Cleary's all right. Like, he got knocked out really bad, and I was really worried about him. He was stretched it off. He didn't move for a little bit of time, but I think I'm hearing that he's okay. That's good. Has a bad concussion. He'll go into the protocols, but and hoping that both of the boys are feeling okay today.
Let's talk about Foss really, really quickly. How did you see his game in the back line?
Yeah, it was pretty solid. I guess for a guy who's in his first game, it was a really, really good game for a guy who's in their first game at AFL level. It's a lot quicker. I thought he played really well. I thought he locked down really, really well. I thought he left his man at the right times. What I didn't see, but we will see in the games to come, is him with ball in hand. That'll
we saw it a little bit of link up and 1-2 play where he sort of broke the game open. My golden helmet moment from the game, which we'll bring back this year as well, is him sort of bounding through the middle a little bit, sort of opened the game up. He got the ball, I think he received the handball back and sort of opened the game up, kicked it down the middle. It was a one-on-one contest he kicked it to, or a pack, sorry, and it spilled over for a goal. He created the goal from it, even though it's indirectly, but just opening the game up like that was almost McKercher-like. So I think that was my favourite moment of the game, even though we didn't have too many highlights. Yeah, I really liked him. I hope he keeps playing there. I really liked his ball use and his decision making, and he looked strong in a contest. So look, I don't think there's crazy things to say about Foss in this game, but I really liked him down there, and I really hope he continues that halfback spot and we can get McKercher playing a little bit better up the ground on the wing.
For sure, 100%.
Yeah. Sean Atley Club Champ votes, then 3 for me is Larky. 2 for me, I'm going to give it to Foss because I was really impressed first game. He did a really good effort on the wing as well, where he closed someone down. Or was it mostly sort of half forward maybe when we were defending, but he spoiled the ball out of bounds and he really had to work to get to the contest. That was a great moment. Number 1 for me is a little bit tricky, to be honest, and I'll get your opinion on this. Who do you think? I've sort of got Paul Curtis kicked 3. Sheasel's numbers, even though I think it was a little bit of lack of impact, they were pretty good, and he sort of did what he did in the mid. I also put Zerha in there just because I thought, even though the lack of kicking was there, his overall game was good. I maybe lean towards Curtis, but I think that might just be because he kicked 3 goals. But who do you think could get the 1 vote from the club champ?
Yeah, this is really, really hard. Obviously, Curtis is up there. I don't think Sheasel had the impact, to be honest. Simpkin was pretty good, but I don't think he had the impact. Zerha, if he kicked probably 1 more goal, would have been the one. For me, I think Jerry was probably the one.
Do you reckon?
Yeah, I think he just dominated the ruck. I'm just looking here, 51 hit-outs, 7 tackles. And he took a few really good contested marks towards the end of the game as well.
Towards the end, yeah. Okay, look, we'll give it to the helmet. I thought he was solid all night. I think probably his last quarter is what I would have liked to see from him for most of the game. I think in the ruck he was good, but around the ground maybe didn't have the impact that I wanted the first 3 quarters, but you're right, he built into the game and a little bit late, but hey, it is what it is. We'll throw him, I think maybe a bit stiff on Curtis, but for maybe Curtis came alive in the last where Sherry was competing all day and, you know, gave our midfield the first use, even though we didn't do much with it. So, look, Club champ done, golden helmet moment done. I think the podcast is done for now, just to keep it not too long, because some people get a bit grumpy and cranky when the podcast is too long. So, look, thank you for coming on, mate. Thank you for dissecting the game with me. We are going to have the episode out. The Q&A episode will come out in the next few days. So all the fans that wrote into my post and gave you questions, we're going to do a separate episode on YouTube for that. So get around the YouTube channel, follow us on all the socials. We did some great stuff. And Chief, thank you for coming on and chatting North Ball with me, mate.
Thanks, Josh. Always a pleasure, mate.
We'll chat to you again very soon.
See ya.